Difficult to know where to start with the situation at United at the moment, but Adam, I'm going to start with your recent tweet, if that's all right. I'm going to read it out in case people haven't seen it. There's a real pendulum feel to Manchester United right now. Top 4, 2 trophies, and a Glazer exit equals 9 out of 10 season. Fifth, letting Liverpool in, 1 trophy, enabling Manchester City treble, and Glazer's stay equals a 5 out of 10 season, brackets at best. That is literally what the club is facing up to in these final weeks of the season, isn't it?
It is. 5 out of 10 is really generous, isn't it?
I was going to say that, but I
if
wanted to be
my,
polite at the start of the pod. But
yeah,
2 out of 10, maybe.
Yeah, that would be, given where they were sort of having beaten Barcelona and won a Carabao Cup against Newcastle, that would be a real come down. They're on this kind of precipice, both on the pitch, in the boardroom, and it all feels a little bit avoidable. You know, the team kind of has, I wouldn't say like self-destruct is maybe too strong a word, but they've certainly been on that journey over the last few weeks in terms of wasting chances and giving cheap goals away. And also, you know, this process, this strategic review that the Glazers started, you know, in 2022, it didn't need to be going into the final month of the Premier League season.
Are we still calling it a strategic review at this point? Because I've forgotten it was even called that. It was such a long time ago that this review started.
Well, it depends who you speak to, doesn't it? The club are still calling it a strategic review. The club never promised that this was going to be a sale or a full sale now or anything like that. You know, it was always that the club were exploring options and strategic options. Because there are 2 bids on the table to buy the club, to get control of the club, I think that's what people have kind of taken for themselves, and that's the decision that the family are making at the moment. But I say it's an avoidable situation because it was always going to be the case that Manchester United would go into the final month of the season with some form of uncertainty about what they may achieve, because, you know, you're a big club and you might get to a final, or you might be competing for things. You know, back in January, I think you guys on your Manchester United podcast started talking about winning Premier League titles at one point.
No, don't remember that.
Don't remember that.
So, you know, it was always clear that there was going to be something that Manchester United would have on the line. And they are now in this situation where, you know, you have this situation with what they might win or not win on the pitch, what they might achieve budget-wise next season in terms of the Champions League, whether the club may be sold. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, they've also got to communicate a decision on Mason Greenwood. So this is potentially a very, very busy month for Laurie Whitwell.
It certainly is. It feels like every month's a busy month for Laurie.
He's got another one.
He thinks he's about to go on. He thinks he's about to go on holiday for the summer, and he's got another thing coming. What do you see as, you know, I don't know, if you were to be comparing him to another manager, what is his style of football? Because that's something I've been struggling with particularly the last couple of months.
I think ideally he'd like to dominate the ball, wouldn't he? But he's having to make adaptation because of the personnel that he's got. So Lisandro Martinez was absolutely his signing. I mean, United will say that he was on the short list of 5 left-sided centre-backs, you know, and they've scouted him. But I don't think without Ten Hag being manager, he would have been at the club. So that's very much his player. And you can see from the way that he is, you know, excellent on the ball, can wriggle out of tight situations. That's the kind of centre-back that he wants, someone that can help dominate the ball. Obviously, he's been injured, you know, the last few weeks. I think Luke Shaw, to be fair to him, has done a really good job in that role. But I think you can see there's certain bits of his play that I'm seeing repeatedly. So he'll have, like, you know, the centre-backs come out of position into the flanks. So Rafael Varane, in fact, that's where he did his injury, you know, out on the sort of right wing, collecting the ball from, I'm not sure who the right back was, but Diogo Dalot maybe. And, you know, Luke Shaw was doing the same thing at West Ham, coming out to the left-hand side, and that kind of suits his game anyway, you know, as a fullback. So he's got these kind of rotating positions, and certainly in attack as well. You know, you've got Antony coming inside, you've got Rashford coming inside. He wants players overloading those kind of areas so they can then, you know, play the ball around the 18-yard box and make chances. And to be fair, against West Ham, they did do that for the first 20 minutes. It's just that when they had the shots, they went off target. So I'm endorsing that way of playing, and it's clearly first iteration of what he would like to see because of the players that he's got. Which is why he wanted Frankie de Jong, all summer. Casemiro's a very good player, but very different player to Frankie de Jong. And that's one of those aspects where you go, okay, well, that's where the recruitment side need to be ahead of the curve. Casemiro was basically a player that has done fabulous work for United this season, maybe tailed off a little bit towards the end now, but he was offered by agents and United went for it as the season looked like it might unravel to begin with, with that defeat at home to Brighton and then just before the Brentford defeat. So I think we're still trying to see what kind of version of football Ten Hag will want. And David De Gea is a key sort of question mark in all that. I mean, Ten Hag's been insistent that he wants him to stay, but clearly he isn't his ideal version of a goalkeeper. So that's something that's going to be kind of having to ironed out. But I mean, that's a decision that, because he wants a striker that can actually score goals, so that has to be the priority this summer. So the goalkeeper has to kind of wait a little bit. And that goes back to recruitment, ownership structure, the debt on the club, all these questions that you raised earlier.
Adam, in terms of the end of this season, how important do you think it is to end it in the right way for Erik Ten Hag? I mean, he's had, a moderately successful year in terms of winning a trophy and being in top four contention. But if they were to end the campaign out of the top four, losing the cup final to Manchester City, could that have a knock-on effect moving forward about the job that Ten Hag is trying to do at Old Trafford, do you think?
Yeah, I think it'd be a total calamity. Given how much
words.
Yeah, I mean, given how much optimism there has been during the season, given that I think even in the last few weeks where they've not been playing as well, I've never had the sense that the players, don't trust the manager or anything like that. I mean,
they're just tired, aren't they?
I think they're tired to a certain extent. I think they're not playing very well to a certain extent. I think maybe certain teams have worked out how to play against Manchester United as well, and Ten Hag doesn't really change that. I think his idea is just we do that better, but they're not doing it better. I think it would be a big issue in terms of, because Ten Hag isn't the most expressive individual, which is great, right? When you're winning matches, no one cares. No one cares what the manager says and how sort of vivid he is in explaining things. But I think if you have sort of the end to the season that Manchester United may potentially have, and obviously fans will hope that's not the case, but if you have an end to the season which is basically you win the little Carabao Cup relative to Manchester United's big ambitions, then you go and lose 7-0 against Liverpool, you crash out of the Europa League, and then you go on this really bad away run of form where, and you have to remember, sort of the people who are spending money on those away trips, I think they're entitled to expect a little bit better than what they've had over the last 3-4 months or so. And I think you could see
the last 12 months, Adam, to be fair.
Well, yeah, I mean, you go back to the end of last season, I think they ended with 6 or 7 consecutive away defeats as well. Yeah. So it's not solely a Ten Hag problem. But I think if you get into that stage where you've not only sort of gone off the rails in terms of form, but you've let Liverpool back into the Champions League, and then you don't put up a fight against Manchester City in the FA Cup final, and you're still not really expressing things particularly sort of vividly or persuasively, which I don't think Ten Hag really does, then I do think he'll have a bit of an issue in this. So I'm not saying his job's on the line or anything like that, but I think it means he goes into next season under far more pressure than he would do, obviously, if Man United get the top four and compete really well in the FA Cup final, whatever the outcome is to that. So it's a really important 4 weeks for the way I think that he is perceived, both by fans and also more externally.
There's echoes there, isn't there, in Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's season when they reached the Europa League final in Gdansk, and that could have actually been the platform for him to kind of express himself with his own players, and they're thinking, okay, this guy, we've won a trophy with him, and also have the confidence in the transfer market as well, and it kind of just it took something away from his managerial authority, I think, and I sense the same thing here. I think the fact that he's already got the Carabao Cup and they ground it out in a final against Newcastle at Wembley, I think that's at least a tick, where they go, okay, in these crunch moments we can win. They've done that, against Man City, against Barcelona, at Old Trafford. It has to be said, against Liverpool, at the start of the season, against Arsenal. So they have managed to come through these pressurized situations. So but if they do fall away here, that would then undermine that. And yeah, I agree with you, Adam, that I think that would just erode something about Ten Hag's authority. But I would also still caveat that with the fact that he's had injuries, and they are this was the first time that he has acknowledged the fatigue factor, because it's the first midweek that they've had free since the September, which is kind of mad, really, and not only for just fitness levels, but also just for an ability to have sessions with your players on the training pitch and kind of get those principles into them. So I think there would be a bit of a not an excuse, but a reason for United having this kind of issue. That being said,
but the counter argument to that is there was a lot of periods early in the season where he just didn't rotate a lot of key players. He continued to play and play and play, and people, there were people who had sort of watched him at Ajax who were saying to us, this has happened before in terms of, he doesn't really rotate his players. He continues to play them. And we're kind of like, yeah, but who cares? They're winning, right? And I think there is an element to that, which has just kind of come home to roost a little bit, because a lot of them just look at that kind of core 14, 15. And you could basically come back and say, well, he basically just doesn't trust some of the other players.
I think there is a bit of that.
Well,
and I think there's also a bit of the fact that when he was starting, in the early months of this season, he's starting from zero almost, isn't he, in terms of setting the tone with the club, with the fans, trying to move on from what was an absolute disastrous start as well. I don't feel like maybe he had the confidence, I don't know what you think, Adam, in some of the squad players to be able to help United move past those first two matches, because we're talking about probably group stage games of the Europa League where United actually lost the first game against Real Sociedad when he did rotate. So it's almost a perfect storm in that sense for him.
I think so you have to, if you're making like a ticks and crosses column on his first season,
a pros and cons.
A pros and cons.
Podcast, certainly this section podcast. Anyway.
Yeah, well, you'd obviously put ticks. Yeah, he seems to have restored like a sense of unity and spirit, morale, both into the fan base and also into the team. The football has been very good at times. There's other times where it's not really sort of worked out whatsoever. They have some sort of identity when they're playing well. I think in terms of the downsides, I would go back right to when he first took the job, and when he sort of had the view when he first started and thought, I can get Cristiano Ronaldo on board. If you go all the way back to that, his view at the start was, I can get Cristiano Ronaldo to buy into being part of this squad. He'll work hard for me. And sort of within 6 weeks, he'd kind of concluded that's not going to work. And then all of a sudden, you're into the middle of August, you've lost a couple of games, you're spending your money elsewhere. And he's decided to spend a huge part of his budget on a very, very young winger who, although I think he's got huge potential, Anthony, it was not going to provide what was really needed from £100 million expenditure last summer. And I think that is where I think Ten Hag has not really had that much scrutiny in terms of that decision last summer. If you've got £100 million to spend on a forward player or several forward players, is that actually the best way to spend it, given you've worked with this player for quite a long time as well? Now, it could be next season he kicks on, but is he going to kick on to be Mo Salah, Sadio Mane kind of levels? Personally, I don't see that much at the moment. And when you think that they already had issues with Ronaldo, Martial, Rashford was obviously massively out of form at that time as well. I think those are the questions that are maybe fair about Ten Hag. And I know people listening will think, oh, you're going all the way back to last summer. But I think there's a real knock-on effect to that now, given they can't score a goal.